Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring today's most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. North Korea has reported on the impeachment vote of South Korean President Yeol at the National Assembly this past Saturday. The motion, passed after Yoon's controversial and short-lived imposition of martial law on December 3rd, suspends his duties until South Korea's constitutional court decides whether to reinstate him or remove him from office. The Korean Central News Agency reported on the news in detail, explaining how Yoon's martial law decree, which was meant to address political unrest, sparked widespread criticism and led to charges of insurrection against him. So what's behind the regime's very up-to-date and detailed report of the latest incidents in South Korea to its people, and how could the regime take advantage, could the regime take advantage of this situation for further provocations? For answers to this, we invite Evans Revere, former acting Assistant Secretary of State and non-resident senior fellow in the Foreign Policy Program at Brookings. Welcome, Mr. Revere.
Great to be back with you.
And also joining us is Brian Myers, Professor of International Studies at Dongseol University. Great to have you, Professor.
Good to be here.
So let's start with Professor Myers. North Korea reported on the news of the passage of the impeachment motion against President Yoon. And unlike the impeachment of former President Park Geun-hye, where there was an analysis and commentary, North Korea only emphasized the political confusion. What might be the reason for this?
Well, Kim Jong-un has spent much of this year trying to convey the message to the outside world that he has given up on South Korea as a potential partner, that he trusts nobody on the political spectrum here. He has no more interest in peaceful unification. Basically, he regards South Korea as a foreign country, and he's blown up highways and railways which have been constructed to connect the two Koreas. Now, I regard this as a propaganda tactic aimed at Washington, but of course, Kim wants it taken seriously. And this makes it hard for North Korea to show as much interest in this South Korean crisis as it showed 8 years ago during the candlelight demonstrations. I think a certain emotional distance has to be made apparent this time. But I don't think we should make the mistake of assuming that propaganda put out by the KCNA is the same as the kind which average people are getting in farms and factories. I think they may well be getting a more old school kind of coverage. They may be being urged to feel solidarity with the opposition.
Right, and there are concerns that North Korea might provoke tensions by taking advantage of South Korea's political instability, but the prevailing opinion is that North Korea is unlikely to provoke recklessly. Mr. Revere, what's your outlook on this?
Well, as far as the overall North Korean treatment of this and its approach regarding provocations, et cetera, there's an old saying in politics and diplomacy that when your adversary is digging himself into a hole, don't interfere. And I think that's the sort of mindset that's guiding North Korean thinking right now. South Korea has done some damage to its international stature by the recent attempt to impose martial law. It has undermined its ties with the United States, Japan, and other democracies. And it has raised some suspicions in the international community about the ultimate stability of South Korea's democracy. Now, the South Korean government is working hard to remove concerns and suspicions and restore confidence, and that's a good thing, and I think it'll work in the end. But meanwhile, I think North Korea is probably very content with where things stand at this particular moment, that South Korea has gotten some pretty bad press. I would agree with the overall view that North Korea is probably unlikely to engage in any sort of a major provocation right now. They have a lot going on, and particularly in their effort to support the Russians fighting against Ukraine. But there may be some temptation to do something of a lower order, particularly in light of the revelations that are coming out that South Korea's military may have conducted some provocations of its own in an attempt to draw the North Koreans into some sort of a response that the South Koreans could then use to justify the imposition of martial law. Just one final point, and that is the thing that is worrisome to me right now is the fact that so many senior members of South Korea's military, including its defense minister and other key commanders, have been removed or resigned or are under arrest. This has got to have some sort of an impact on command and control in the South Korean military. It's also going to have some sort of an impact on the smoothness of U.S. ROK military-to-military communications. That problem is being addressed right now between Washington and Seoul, and I think it'll come out okay in the end. But in the meantime, we need to make sure that North Korea does not see that as an opportunity to engage in mischief.
Right, and yeah, so it's going to be important for the political turmoil to be settled down as soon as possible. Now, speaking of Washington, Donald Trump, U.S. President-elect, appointed his foreign policy advisor, former German Ambassador Richard Grenell, as special envoy for North Korean affairs. What kind of a person is he? And can this be interpreted as Trump's intent to directly manage U.S. North Korea dialogue by appointing someone from his inner circle? Mr. Revere?
There's nothing that Donald Trump values more than loyalty and fealty. I think we've seen that over the years, and we see that in the way he's made his appointments and the way he handles his subordinates. Ambassador Grenell has shown himself to be a very dedicated loyalist to Donald Trump and Donald Trump's movement. And Donald Trump's presidency, when it begins, including his management of North Korea and other major policy issues, is going to be a very top-down, leader-centric administration, leader-centric process. And Donald Trump will not be steered by lower-level subordinates, but by having someone like Ambassador Grenell on his team and handling key portfolios, including, as it appears obvious, North Korea. I think Donald Trump is going to be able to be assured that he has somebody in place who will follow his instructions, follow the president's instructions and guidance, and will do so to the letter. And I think that's the major reason that that Grenell is in the position to which he has been appointed.
Right. Could you also tell us a little bit about this person's understanding of the situation in the Korean Peninsula, or his background on this?
He's a very capable diplomat. He's got a lot of experience. He worked hard on security and military issues in Europe. I wouldn't describe him as a Korea expert or a Korea hand, but he's certainly a foreign policy expert and knows a lot about this portfolio. But going back to the point I made earlier, maybe the thing that he knows the best is how to serve and be loyal to and inspire confidence in Donald Trump, who ultimately is going to be the North Korea desk officer in the next administration.
All right. Now, in a latest interview with The Times, Trump said that North Korea's involvement has made ending the Ukraine war more complicated, but he also expressed confidence in resolving the issue by, highlighting his personal relationship with Kim Jong-un. Professor Myers, should we expect that the likelihood of U.S. North Korea talks, which were thought to be sidelined in Trump's second term, has increased?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure what he meant by that statement, though, because the presence of North Korean soldiers doesn't make it any more or less difficult to negotiate an end to that conflict. If it does come to peace talks, I think neither Zelensky nor Putin is going to give the North Korean soldiers much thought, and Kim Jong-un would have to accept the outcome. I think it's more accurate to say that the Ukraine war has made a nuclear deal with North Korea more difficult, because I don't see how Trump and Kim can begin negotiating in earnest so long as North Korea is fighting with Russia against Ukraine. Nor, I think, would Trump get much praise from the American public if he were to try to reach a deal with Kim Jong-un before reaching a deal to end the war in Ukraine. More Americans are worried about the Ukraine war going nuclear than are worried about Kim's ICBMs. Despite the efforts of the American media to somehow present the threat of North Korean nuclear war as being greater than the threat of a Russian nuclear strike. So I think that Trump's outreach to Kim may well have to wait until the Ukraine war ends.
Mm-hmm. Now, as the likelihood of U.S. North Korea talks increases, South Korea's role and response seem very necessary, but there are concerns that it will be difficult to respond actively under the acting president, Han Duck-soo. And given concerns of South Korea being sidelined, what kind of strategies should the government be able to explore, Mr. Revere?
Well, I think it's important to keep in mind that Donald Trump's approach on North Korea is not going to be driven by the views or sensitivities of South Korea. I hate to put it that bluntly, but I think experience has shown us how Donald Trump likes to operate. I have tremendous respect for Han Duck-soo, the acting president. He's one of the most capable, intelligent, and dedicated officials I've ever met in my career. And I have no doubt that acting President Han is going to do everything to ensure that South Korea's views and its positions are conveyed at all levels to the new administration in Washington, D.C. But frankly, South Korea's challenge in ensuring that its views are listened to and respected is not a matter of who is sitting in the Yongsan presidential office. It's a matter of who is going to be sitting in the Oval Office at the White House. That's going to be the major challenge for South Korea, not just on North Korea policy issues, but other issues as well. And that needs to be kept firmly in mind going forward.
So it'll depend on how Trump would move with his policies on the Korean Peninsula. Now, meanwhile, the U.S. government officially confirmed that North Korean troops deployed to Russia were sent to the front lines, where dozens were reported killed or injured. Professor Myers, do you think the military ties between Russia and North Korea will strengthen even further?
Yeah, I do think so, because military cooperation just has a habit of strengthening over time anyway, but especially when a war is being fought. And the North Koreans are said to be getting billions of dollars worth of aid in the form of cash, oil, and other supplies in return for its support. So they're likely to become quite dependent on this military alliance if they're not already. I think even if there were to be some sudden diplomatic breakthrough in the first weeks of Trump's term, which brought an end to the Ukraine conflict, I would expect the Russia-North Korea alliance to continue strengthening anyway.
Mm-hmm. And North Korea is known to have already sent over 10,000 troops to Russia. Professor Myers, what is the likelihood of additional troop deployments, and what kind of scale and timing might we expect?
Well, I think Kim Jong-un is probably pretty unhappy with the way his troops' debut on the world stage has gone. For years we got heroic footage of his special forces training in extreme conditions, looking very muscular and formidable and breaking cinder blocks with their bare hands. But for the past few days, we've seen footage of North Korean corpses, of unprepared and frightened soldiers being followed around a snowy plain by Ukrainian drones. And even more recently, we've seen North Koreans limping in a Russian hospital. I think Kim wanted his troops to get battle experience, and they're certainly getting that, but there's nothing to be gained from having them wiped out or humiliated in full view of cameras. And he must now be worried that those images are going to make their way back to North Korea. On the other hand, I think his soldiers may well have performed better than the Ukrainian and American news media would have us believe. The Russian assault is by no means going badly, it's intensifying. So I think we just need to wait a few more days before we start making predictions about whether and how many additional troops Kim Jong-un is likely to send.
Right. And the U.S. government has previously sanctioned high-ranking North Korean officials involved in military support to Russia and ballistic missile development. Now, additionally, the South Korean government imposed independent sanctions on North Korean generals and institutions involved in military cooperation with Russia. Mr. Revere, how effective do you think are these sanctions?
There's always been a lot of misunderstanding about the purpose and effect of bilateral and multilateral sanctions on North Korea. The sanctions that have been put in place over the years have been put forward in order to raise the cost to North Korea of the actions that it's taking to violate its obligations to the UN Security Council And the pressure that's been put on North Korea through those sanctions over the years has had some effect. It's actually one of the reasons why North Korea has moved so closely to Russia and continues to get considerable support from the Chinese, because international economic sanctions are having an effect on the DPRK. But these sanctions are not going to convince or compel North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons, and that's not actually what they were intended to do. They were intended to raise the costs to North Korea. And so I think going forward, to the extent that the United States and its partners and allies around the world continue to implement these sanctions, it will continue to require North Korea to pay a considerable cost. But if the goal is actually to convince or compel North Korea to make a dramatic change in policy, the sorts of sanctions that we've been looking at are not going to do the job, quite frankly. And there have been a lot of holes in the sanctions regime. A lot more could have been done. The word maximum pressure was bandied about a number of years back. We've never reached actual maximum pressure in terms of the maximum amount of things that we could do to North Korea. There are many, many more things that could be done to cause tremendous pain to the North Korean regime, both in its economy, its financial stability, its banking system, et cetera. So going forward, if the idea is to just continue to keep the heat on North Korea, these sorts of sanctions, if they're properly implemented, can do that. But if the United States and its partners decide that we want to ramp up the temperature on North Korea and really convince them to move in a different direction, we would have to adopt a very, very different and much tougher approach in dealing with the DPRK via sanctions.
Right. So these sanctions that we're having, they are effective, but they have limited power, and we can escalate them, but we're not doing it until now. Now, meanwhile, ties between North Korea and Russia seem to be getting closer and closer. Now, on the 16th, regular passenger train services between Russia and North Korea resumed for the first time in 4 years after the COVID-19 pandemic. Professor Myers, what's the background behind the resumption, and what could this symbolize?
Well, I think it's important to note that Russia has resumed train services to China at about the same time. So I think this is not so much a story about Russia's deepening ties to North Korea as a story of the whole region pretty much returning to normal after the disruptions of the coronavirus pandemic 4 years ago. And in any case, this train makes very short 2-mile trips back and forth across the narrow North Korean border with Russia, and they're not going to be running every day, nor I think is that train going to be bringing in a lot of tourists or traders. I would expect most of those people either to go by ship or to go into North Korea via China. This crossing where the train is going to start going back and forth is by no means as busy as the crossing between Dandong in China and Sinŭiju in North Korea. But, it's significant in the context, not least of sanctions, because we can't be sure what's going back and forth on those trains. And I also believe that the northeast of the country, which, as is widely known, is really the most impoverished part, is going to welcome whatever traders and tourists it can get.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about Mr. Revere? With the resumption, what kind of transactions should the international community be worried about?
Well, I would agree with my colleague that the limited capacity of those rail lines and other means of transportation in that part of North Korea are going to be a practical bar to any substantial use of that route for anything that would make me nervous. The thing that continues to make me nervous is not so much what might be going from North Korea into Russia and onward, but what may be coming from Russia into North Korea in terms of what is it exactly that the DPRK is getting in terms of technology, in terms of assistance, in terms of new military capabilities, new satellite launch capabilities, new fuel capabilities, new guidance technologies, shielding for its warheads on its MIRV ICBMs. Those are the things that make me nervous. And so going forward, I think we need to keep a careful eye on the quid pro quo relationship that's been established between Moscow and Pyongyang, particularly what Pyongyang may be able to provide the DPRK in terms of military and technology that could affect the military balance on the Korean Peninsula and perhaps ultimately contribute to North Korea's threat to the U.S. homeland.
So it's more likely objects and things rather than concerns about people or North Korean troops being sent to Ukraine or something?
There are plenty of other ways for the North Koreans to get troops to the battlefront rather than using a small rail line that goes across the border into this obscure corner of Russia.
All right. Thank you so much for your insights. We'll have to leave our discussion right here. Professor Myers and Mr. Revere, we appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Now, that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.